Well, howdy, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey, Joe.
All right. So we just did a podcast yesterday, a special edition on the 666 bills that went
A
into
very
effect.
fitting number, I must say.
I mean, too perfect. It's just scary. It's almost like they planned it. So today we wanted to talk about all the other things that are going on, and there's quite a bit actually. We basically got Texas dominating the headlines across the country for a number of different things that passed yesterday. We got a new poll that dropped. That's really bad news for Greg Abbott. We'll talk through that a little bit. We got what's happening, an update with the border wall, the COVID deaths that are still ravaging our state and how that's affecting local school districts and what folks are doing to fight back against that. And we're seeing a rise in right-wing extremism and violence across our state, I kind of feel like that's something a lot of people aren't really talking about. But I think if it was the other way around, it would be the only thing that the right was talking about. So we want to talk about that a little bit. And so let's just go right back up to the top, because there was some breaking news from the Supreme Court today based on the abortion ban that Texas passed and went into effect yesterday. Do you have any updates you can give us on what happened with the Supreme Court?
Sure. Well, there is something called the Shadow Docket, which basically allows them to make a ruling without ever hearing any testimony. So that is what occurred late in the evening, midnight, actually. They announced this, and they basically said that they were not stopping this Texas law from going into effect. As you mentioned, a bunch of laws were signed. A lot occurred September 1st, and one of those is an abortion ban, which is essentially would occur at 6 weeks. But this law also has this provision that would allow anyone to sue someone who aids or abets an abortion. We've discussed how crazy this is. A lot of people who have been sort of looking into this law have noted there's even intent factors in that. So you could just intend to help someone procure an abortion. And remember, this bill has no carve-outs for rape or incest. So if you're a rape crisis counselor, you could be sued. A lot of people have pointed out that this is a very insane bill. And basically the Supreme Court's argument was because Texas deputized citizens to do this sort of vigilante on the ground stuff, that it was almost a clever way that they worked through the system. So the law is in effect, and we're going to be living with this. I think a lot of states looked to Texas and are now probably going to do their own duplicate versions of this.
Mm-hmm.
So this is some pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, they certainly got the nod from the Supreme Court to go ahead and do this in other states. And I'm wondering, I'm assuming that this only applies to abortions in the state of Texas. And so if somebody were to go to another state because it was at the 6 week mark or getting close or whatever, that they wouldn't actually, it may not cover that particular situation. But to your point, yeah, it's a intentionally cruel policy. And we see that in the incredibly gross misogyny that we see all across Twitter and social media of people just celebrating this and just being really, gross about it. And I just don't see how this helps make their case, because polls have shown that actually, even in Texas, people oppose this type of, egregious, assault on people's rights. And even to the point where Texas Taliban was trending yesterday. I don't know if you saw that. A lot of people making the obvious point that, hey, some of the laws that you guys just passed are the same thing the Taliban is doing in Afghanistan. So
I think very infamously, there is a tweet from State Representative Matt Schaefer, who I guess a few weeks ago made that exact same argument that even the Taliban opposes abortion, which that was a bit of a cell phone on his part. I don't think the dunk that he thought it was.
Yeah. That whole, there's a Twitter account called Conservatives Almost Getting It. And I think that's like a perfect example of that. Almost got it. But
so close.
Yes, so close. But yeah, so, we had this awful, it's almost just like, we talked about Texas dominating the headlines. It's like, where do you start? I mean, this abortion thing, the guns that went into effect, basically guns anywhere, no training, no license, carry it, or, you know, hidden or out or whatever, anywhere, also went into effect. And so, yeah, I mean, it's fittingly, I happened to also yesterday watch the movie Tombstone. I don't know if you've ever seen it,
Oh yeah.
but it's one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time, Western movie.
Wyatt Earp, right?
Yeah, it's about Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral, and basically, you know, it takes some creative license with it, but it's such a good movie. But even even in Tombstone, back in the 1870s, there were two things me and my wife noticed that like blew our mind. One, there's a scene when they're going through town, and there's just totally in the background, like not part of the real scene or story, but you see a couple women holding signs that say equal work for equal pay. And this is set in 1870. So we're still fighting some of these same fights. And there's a point in the movie where gun violence is getting out of control. The sort of these gangster, you know, are like taking over, and they essentially had to ban guns in the city, in this little town. And so, you know, Wyatt Earp, who was a, you know, famous lawman from Kansas who had moved to Tombstone to sort of reset his life, ends up finding himself having to be in sort of this position of law enforcement again. And it's just like, why is 1870 look so much like 2021 in the state of Texas? And so, you know, it was just really awful. But
Well, we actually, we did. I did a story earlier this week. Was with a volunteer from Moms Demand Action, our Dallas chapter. So, they were going to businesses, letting them know that there is signage that you can post that would prohibit someone without that permit to have the gun. It's a large sign, so it's not, it has to be about 30 inches or so. But they were working with businesses. And one of the points that she brought up was, most of the businesses, they kind of knew about this law. They were interested in the signage. But this is just another thing that they have to deal with. They're coming off, a year and a half of this, wretched economic downturn, a pandemic, which unfortunately is still going on thanks to a lot of the garbage policies of the Republican Party. And so now you're added to this mix, this new law, which they now have to, put this sign up, and you're still going to have fears that someone's not going to comply with that. So it is very much, we need a Wyatt Earp or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's a huge sign too, by the way. I mean, it is prohibitively large, because they want it to be prohibitive. So if you have any other type of signage about your restaurant or, anything else, it's going to be cumbersome in the window. And when they were arguing this on the floor, the idea behind it was that somebody who's parking their car in the parking lot should be able to see the sign before they walk up to the door, which is absolutely obviously ridiculous. So they claim to be pro-business and they claim to be pro-property rights until they aren't. And, it's so rare that we actually really call them out on it, because it's such a big part of their philosophy. So at least they claim so. So the interesting thing is, as we talk about these things and we talk about how hard they're working to take away people's right to vote, we have a new poll out which explains exactly why they're working so hard to take away your right to vote. Is because a lot of these things they're doing simply aren't popular and aren't supported by most Texans. And so I think the top line of this new poll has to be that Abbott's approval rating is now 41% and his disapproval rating is now 50%. I mean, this is pretty incredible, right? I mean, this is a huge turnaround for him. I mean, he had at a peak, he had 52% support, and now that's completely flipped.
Right. You sort of think about these last couple of weeks for Abbott, and it's been, particularly, I think COVID-19, the fact that is still, we're in the midst of such a horrible third wave with that, on top of, again, a lot of these issues that are catering to a very small base of that Republican Party. He is someone who seems to be worried that he might lose the endorsement of Donald Trump. And that's simply not where the majority of Texans are. So yes, it was a very shocking poll. On the other hand, it would, again, be very nice if the Democrats had maybe a candidate to sort of say, like, hello, I am out here and I am not Greg Abbott. And this is,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the fun things we did today was we our graphics team pulled up created a job posting for governor. I thought that was pretty funny. And you know, I actually shared it on Twitter too, but you know, that's, you know, we're kind of poking fun at it, but the fact is, yeah, you're right. It's like it doesn't matter how much people approve of him if you have no opponent. It only takes one vote for him to be reelected. And the interesting thing in Texas too, for a lot of folks who may not realize this, because we think of democracy as, you know, 50% plus one wins. But for governor in the state of Texas, it's whoever gets the most votes wins. So you actually don't even have to get 50% of the vote in Texas to win a governor's race. And in fact, in 2006, Rick Perry won with only 39% of the vote. And so that's how unpopular he was. At the time, we had two different independents and a Democrat on the ballot. The Democrat, I don't remember, I think he got 30% or something. And then, you know, a lot of people blame Kinky Freeman for his loss in that, but I really don't. I mean, you know, it was another situation that we're getting ourselves into right now, which is that particular guy who ran, Chris Bell, got in at the very last minute. In fact, those two independents were already up and out and raising money before he decided to get in the race. And I certainly don't blame him. I mean, we had nobody before him. But the idea that was, you know, I don't know, 15 years ago, I can't do the math, but I think it's something like 15 years ago. And we're just reliving the same thing where nobody wants to step up. And it's hard if you don't feel like you have the backing of infrastructure to actually win. I mean, yeah, who wants to just be a sacrificial lamb, right? But at the end of the day, my goodness, we've had 55,000 people who sacrificed everything just with COVID alone because of the lack of leadership that we've seen in the state. So hopefully somebody will come forward. We are seeing some names being bouncing around for different roles, but so far not really for governor, and that's really unfortunate.
So yeah, if you do know anyone, we do have that job
Yeah,
listing
exactly.
with Texas Signal, so pass it on.
Yeah, I mean, you know, hey, salary, benefits. I mean, $150,000 is nothing to, you know, sneeze at. So, pretty
Need
good,
a
you know.
nice accommodations and
Oh
all that.
yeah, yeah. Let's throw in the fact that you're going to be living in a nice mansion in the middle of Austin, where real estate is extremely expensive. I mean, you know, there's some perks that come with the job for sure. And so, you know, but back to this poll, there's like so much in this poll, and like literally it must have dropped just a few hours before I saw it, before we started recording. So I haven't had a chance to dive completely into it. So if you have some like top lines or something you want to share, like please bring it on. There's a couple other things in there that I saw that I thought were super interesting. You know, it looks like from this poll and from everything else we've talked about over the last, I don't know, a couple months, that what is driving Abbott's poll numbers going down right now is his absolute attack on local control and his total mishandling of COVID-19. And so the two things that kind of point that out in this poll and support that argument are the fact that 53% of Texans oppose Abbott's handling of COVID, and that's up from 29% a year ago. And what was he doing a year ago? He was putting in mask mandates, and he was, you know, looking like he was actually going to make an effort to stop the spread of it and things like that. And people were like, even Democrats were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's do this together." And then he figured out that his base didn't really like all that stuff, and that was just too much government. And here we are facing all these other, I guess you have to call them voluntary shutdowns, because they're not shutdowns enforced by the government necessarily. But because of the spread of COVID, we're seeing shutdowns, and we're seeing, you know, cancellations of large events that were coming to Texas. Giant economic drivers for local communities are going away, and just poof, because of the fast spread and the mishandling by our governor. And then the other piece of this is that most Texans actually support their local officials handling of COVID-19 more than the state. And that just tells you, with all these local school districts fighting the governor and suing him basically every day, that folks are paying attention, and they're seeing that, and they're taking the side of their local government, because they know that those are the people closest to them. And when those decisions are made, it's made about not just, you know, from their position of power, but they live in those communities. And so they want the family and their children to be safe, and they're not protected in a bubble inside the governor's mansion, and they're not probably having access to Regeneron if they were to get COVID. And so it's really clear that some of this is finally starting to break through. And I feel like that's a point we always try to make. What's the point where this stuff starts to break through?
Right. And so the number has been steadily increasing throughout this year. So about 25% of Texans are extremely concerned of contracting COVID, and 20% are concerned. So that's about 45% of the state that is very fearful of this virus. Now, you have to take into account some of these folks are vaccinated. Now, they might have people in their life that are immunocompromised, or they have children under 12. So this, we know that the vaccination will most likely prevent you from being seriously sick or hospitalized. But again, children under 12, they don't have access to this vaccine. People that are, immunocompromised, there's some limitations with that. So, and people are witnessing this firsthand. I've talked with a number of folks, from different various school districts where the classrooms, there's been a positive case or this and that. And it's very much, this is starting to hit truly close to home for people. And it's scary. And they really don't want to see a governor trying to prevent a superintendent from implementing basic health and safety protocols.
Yeah. And to your point about this, there was I just read of another suburban school district outside of Waco, Texas, that had to shut down completely because 2 teachers died of COVID. And it's just, again, I mean, these shutdowns are going to happen. Are they going to happen because we're trying to prevent the spread of the virus, or are they going to happen because the virus has spread and ravaged the community so much that they're forced to shut down? And it seems like the latter is what the governor is
we had a story earlier this week. 2 students from Frisco ID. Frisco is in North Texas. It was a school district that was not implementing a mask requirement or doing contact tracing, and so 2 students started a petition to change this. I think it's when I chatted with them, it was about 1,700 signatures. Now it's up to 2,500. But one of these students, he was in a classroom, a crowded classroom. Another classmate of his got notified via his phone that he was positive for COVID. This student, who was of course maskless, leaves this crowded classroom. And obviously for this student who started the petition, that was scary. And so he talked with another student at a different high school in Frisco. And, she conveyed the same thing at her school, that there was very few kids with masks. And they were just very frustrated that this ISD had sort of bent over backwards to accommodate Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton. And when in fact, these students just, they want to be in school, but they want to do it safely. And that's really all that I don't think that's that much to ask of our students. And so that's kind of what precipitated that petition. But, certainly, there's stories like that happening all across our state. And some of these have very tragic consequences.
Yeah. And it's really hard just to even take these folks seriously when they talk about, again, the trolls and the legislators that passed the abortion bill, talking about they're doing it for children and trying to save children, when the science shows that you're putting mothers at risk when they have to make tough decisions, or when the doctor tells them straight out that you can't, even if you continue with this pregnancy, your child will be stillborn, or some other horrific things that no one ever wants to hear. And then now, instead of thinking about their family and how they're going to handle this situation, they have to think about the government. They have to think about Greg Abbott and legislators, and how if somebody finds out, oh, weren't you pregnant? You're not pregnant anymore. Like what? And then now, I mean, all these horrible things that you mentioned that can now happen to people, putting a bounty on their head, and these things like this are what people are having to focus on. And meanwhile, if they actually really cared about children, they wouldn't be fighting so hard to expose them in schools to.
Yes, well, one of the big proponents for the extreme anti-abortion bill, Jeff Leach, who's up in Collin County, up in North Texas, he's sponsoring a bill that would prohibit any school district from being able to implement something like a mask mandate. So, God forbid we're in an even worse pandemic years down the line. uh, they're trying to take away the ability to protect children, which I don't know. These people call themselves pro-life, but that doesn't seem pro-life to me.
No, it's absolutely not. And so, it's something we'll continue to follow and to see if these polls and things like that affect how the governor is handling this stuff. I saw a journalist, well, now she's an op-ed writer for the Houston Chronicle, Erica Greeter, posted basically a question of like, if Democrats did have a candidate right now, would that potentially moderate some of the things, even just a little bit, the way Greg Abbott is handling this? But right now, he doesn't have anybody pushing back from the middle, let alone the left. And so, if all he has is people from the right dragging him further right, is there the opportunity to have some kind of moderating force? And it's very sad that it's always Democrats that are like, people are lambasting because we're not doing enough to keep Republicans from just basically ruining our state and putting people at risk. At what point are they actually held accountable for the things that they're doing? So far, we haven't actually seen that. Um, but the one of the other things that was in this poll, speaking of, a couple more things that kind of highlight this: 52% of Texans believe that the whole state is headed in the wrong direction. I think that's obviously very bad news for not just the leader of the state, but also his party, who controls every lever of government at this point. Dan Patrick is upside down at 33% support and 42 against, and about 11% who don't know who he is.
I hope, they could be also confusing him with that poor sports personality. I feel so bad
I'm
for.
sure he's probably a little more popular than this Dan Patrick. But yeah, um, the thing is, I think is also important because people are always question polls. So this is a UT poll. It's actually, very solid poll and pollsters there. And, right up front, I read, well, who actually took this poll? And believe it or not, well, you probably should because it's a good poll, but more people identified as Republican who took this poll by about 4 or 5 points or something like that. So it wasn't just Republicans or just Democrats, but 11% were non-affiliated with a party. And I think what this just says is, like, when you look at these results, these aren't just Democrats that are opposed to Greg Abbott and what he's doing. This is Republican voters recognizing that this is getting out of control and out of hand. And I think that'll be the only thing that maybe starts to change the direction on some of this stuff and in the red meat, because obviously all these bills that pass, the worst that are making these headlines, are there for the reason you said, is to bolster their support from the Trump sort of wing of their party, even if most Democrats or most Texans don't support them. And so, one of the other major issues, to sort of shift gears here, I think is really important to point out, like, for the last, as long as I can remember reading these Texas Tribune polls, one of the questions they always ask are, what are the top issues affecting the state? And honestly, like, I always thought it was crazy, but 1 and 2 were immigration and border security. And I feel like those are so tied together. Like, how is that not just like one thing? Immigration and border security is one thing. No, it was immigration and then border security. Well, for the first time I've ever seen in this poll, border security and immigration were bumped by COVID-19. And so people are concerned. They are afraid. People are saying that they think vaccines work. And so, 63% said vaccines work, but we know that the number we're shooting for is 70% to actually have gotten a vaccine. So if only 63% of adults, that's not getting us there. And so we're going to continue to have these problems until more people get with the program.
Well, I think that also explains some of the rhetoric from people like Abbott, or even a man challenging him on the right, Alan West. They've tried to note that it is undocumented immigrants that are spreading COVID, and that's simply false. You have hospital administrators from deeply red places like San Angelo that are saying that is false. This is true. Like, our hospitals are at the brink because of the high level of unvaccinated folks in this country. And again, remember, children under 12 cannot get this vaccine. That's why in North Texas, we've had a run on pediatric ICUs for weeks now, and that's been mirrored throughout the state. So at some point, and also, people need to go to the hospital for other reasons. So imagine, I know someone who was supposed to have their gallbladder removed. that surgery was scheduled for a few weeks ago. It's been pushed back. They're hopeful to do that by October. People who have knee replacement appointments, hip surgeries, these are all quote unquote elective procedures, but they've been postponed. And I have two parents that have had hip replacements. That's not really something you want to keep putting off. And so there's, I mean, real consequences for this. People
Yeah.
have to go to the emergency room for things. And when you don't have that capacity, we all suffer.
Yeah, I mean, and even people who are getting treated. For instance, my mother-in-law, who was recently diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately, she went for her first round of chemo, and they wouldn't even let her husband, in there for her treatment, and so she had to just sit there by herself for hours receiving this treatment in a hospital. Obviously, she didn't know anybody, and is unfamiliar with all everything that's happening, and it's just sad. It's just really
Yeah, I'm
sad.
I'm sorry to hear about the diagnosis, and so
Yeah,
sorry to hear that she had to do that alone. Nobody should
yeah.
have to do that.
No, absolutely. I mean, it just makes you so angry because it's so unnecessary. It's just did not have to happen, and it's the same folks, and I just don't understand if they really truly believe all this. And we're seeing headline after headline now of conservative commentators, high profile people dying of COVID because they didn't get the vaccine, they wouldn't wear a mask, and on their deathbed are telling people, oh yeah, maybe you should go get it, maybe I was wrong. But these are the same people who are spending all this time in these ICUs because they weren't vaccinated, and so it's really hitting them extra hard. They're the ones taking up all the beds. They're the ones out there spreading all the disinformation, telling people the vaccines don't work, masks don't work, and the first thing they do is go and take up a hospital bed, and they're going and getting treated by doctors and nurses who are just exhausted, and they are, guess what, they're wearing a mask and they're vaccinated, so they don't trust anybody until they're dying, and that is so stupid. And it does seem like that is slowly starting to change, and people, health local health officials are saying people are now starting to get the vaccine now, and I'm even seeing some of my younger friends who hadn't gotten the vaccine are saying, oh, I just got my second shot. And so it's good that it's finally happening. It shouldn't have taken this long, but
Well, I mean, there are also companies that are, even though our governor had, we talked about this last week, he re-upped an executive order basically saying that, vaccines, even that had full approval from the FDA, which the Pfizer vaccine just got, you cannot have any mandates on that. But several companies are doing that. Several sports leagues are doing that. The National Football League really instituted some very tough measures for players who were unvaccinated. And that has actually prompted some, not all, there's still a few of those really stubborn anti-vax folks, but many players were just like, you know what, I'm tired of, having to quarantine like this or not be able to do this. So I'm just going to get this shot. And so those type of things work. But it's we're still kind of not at the place we need to be, and it would sure help if certain people in state leadership in this state really weren't standing in our way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what else would help is if the people who have the biggest platforms would not use those to spread misinformation. And so, this, dumb Joe Rogan is just how I'm referring to him, because it's, in lieu of other names that I'd rather not say.
But should we explain who Joe Rogan is for
Do we have to?
audience?
Yeah, Joe Rogan, is just one of these. I mean, basically, has the world's biggest podcast, and so he literally has the biggest audio platform in the world, essentially. And he lives here in Austin, and he moved here recently, and he consistently has these sort of weird, he pretty much has across the board all kinds of people on his show, but he definitely has like these kind of weirdo type people who believe all kinds of weird and crazy stuff. And I feel like he just gets genuine entertainment out of having these folks on. But now this is very serious because of his platform that he has. So many people will listen to this stuff and they take it, seriously, and they do self-harm. And so he has been taking a cocktail of all kinds of things, except for the vaccine, of course. and also including ivermectin, and so which we know is the horse dewormer. And it's just, yeah, I mean, he's absolutely a horse's ass, but I don't know if he's got any horse parasites or not. But it's just like, this is what his folks are going to go out there and do now. They're going to go out and take this because he said it. And guess what? He said, "Oh, I feel great." Now he's taken 100 different things. How do we know which one actually worked or which one actually made him feel better? Or if it's just because he's a very healthy, relatively young person? Who knows?
So I do just have to again remind folks that the horse dewormer, it is intended for horses. Those are 100-pound, 1,000-pound
Yeah.
animals, and it is something that they will take. Yes, if they have a parasite, and it will cleanse their internal organs, so
Yeah.
to say. So yes, I this actually did send me down a bit of a rabbit hole. So I did not realize. So Joe Rogan started his career basically as an actor, and this is very insidious. But one of his first major roles was on this NBC show called News Radio.
Hmm.
The pilot, it was actually recast. So initially Mike O'Malley was in the role that he had, and for whatever reason the folks at NBC just said we got to replace him with Joe Rogan. So to whoever did that at NBC, I blame you now at some point. Like, you did this.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a number of big things over the years. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, he was
Fear
the host of Fear
Factor,
Factor. Yeah.
which was really gross, and I never watched that show. I
I
don't
didn't
really
like it
like,
either.
yeah, just purely gross stuff. Like, and so, and then of course UFC he started, which is like probably what made him uber rich is that because that's wildly popular. And then he of course went on to do his podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, and that's where a lot of these folks are getting all this disinformation from. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate that he has one of those platforms that really matter, and he could go and say, guys, like, get the vaccine. He could have Dr. Fauci on there if he wanted to, because that's how big his platform is. And Dr. Fauci would see a ton of benefit to getting his millions of followers to listen to the good science and talk through the disinformation that he and other folks have shared. And
Yeah, Dr.
so,
Dr. Fauci's been on. I know he's had conversations with Steph Curry, with Julia Roberts. I mean, he's very used to. Brad Pitt portrays him on SNL. He's very used to this now.
Betty likes that.
I think he does.
And so I just actually think it's funny to point out this is not necessarily Texas related, but Candace Owens is one of these other like high profile folks who share tons of misinformation and disinformation about vaccines and masks. And she recently was in Colorado. I guess this was trending today that she went to go get a test. She had scheduled for a test, and when the person who owned the facility found out it was Candace Owens, she said, "Sorry, I'm canceling. I can't in good conscience help someone or whatever, or service someone." She used her right to deny her service because of all the misinformation, disinformation that she's put out there about the vaccine and stuff. So I think that's the
Yeah,
future. I think
there
that's
was
what
a
we
lot
have
of
to do.
mystery. There was a lot of mystery with Candace Owens. She was supposed to actually speak in Texas last weekend. There was a large Texas youth summit for Republicans. We also actually learned at that same venue. I was just sort of pointing out that Congressman Gomert also at that same venue, which Candace mysteriously sort of dropped out of. He informed us that he is also taking the horse dewormer. So that's when you know you're in great medical company, when Louis Gomert is also doing something.
Gosh, I know. Yeah. And so like all like Tractor Supply Company and all these places that like sell that are, it's literally flying off the shelves, and people can't, who actually need it, the animals, they can't get their
Oh
medication.
yeah, I looked at a website for these horse products, and there's like this huge disclaimer that they
Mm,
now have, and it links to an FDA thing like
yeah.
don't use this. So I have to feel. We've had a couple of memes about this, but I do feel out there for the horses that just want their paste, and they can't have it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a virus. It's not a parasite, y'all. It's not what the stuff is for. The CDC has put out warnings about this and other things. And then the sad ironic thing is that these people don't trust these institutions, because that's what Trump did. He broke down the trust of all of our major institutions, from journalism to healthcare professionals. And so when this information is put out there, people literally have the opposite reaction that you want them to have. They say, oh, the CDC is not promoting this. They want me to take their vaccine, and so they're gonna take whatever they told them not to take, which we have to figure out. When you're growing up as a kid, you at some point you figure out what's it called when you say the opposite of what you want somebody to do, to because you want to get them to do
Oh, like
it.
the reverse psychology.
Yes, reverse. Thank you. Reverse psychology. We have to figure out how to make that work for us, right? Like these folks, the CDC just recommended if you're unvaccinated, don't travel on Labor Day. Well, maybe they should say the opposite. Like, hey, if you're vaccinated, get on that bus, get on that plane, like go see your grand, like whatever. Like, what is it? What is it going to take?
What? Maybe, so maybe then in that case, we should start talking about how Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, they're the largest investors in the horse dewormer.
Oh yeah, there you go.
There
Yeah,
you go.
see, yeah, this is so easy. I mean, this is literally what Republicans do all day. So like, we just have to figure out how this is actually working for them. And I was saying yesterday on the podcast, but I kind of want to mention it again, that this is one of the very first times, because Republicans are always so consistent in their messaging. This is one of the very first times that their message is actually working against them. And it was one of the very few things that Trump did that was good. Warp speed, actually is why the vaccine was put on a fast track, and he got it out, and that was great. And he tries to own it and things like that, but it's his people that aren't taking it. And so I don't know what it's going to take necessarily, but on this issue, I feel like this is one of the first times, because we talk a lot about, I definitely talk about all the time, it's like how this narrative on all these different issues, they fit together. Whether it's abortion or guns or voting rights, it's all about controlling people's lives, particularly people of color and minorities and women. And in this case, this is one of the first times where their narrative is actually killing their own people. I don't know.
Well, we talk. I've studied Republicans pretty much all my life.
Studied.
I
them.
never
That's right,
really got. I
yes.
never really got to. If you had told me the horse dewormer would be a thing that they would ingest, I would have said that's a step too far. But you know what? They are constantly surprising us.
Oh boy, yeah, I don't know what's next. But somebody made a really good point. Actually, it might have been Matt Iglesias, or someone like that, but it was a national pundit. But they were asking a question like, was there a specific event that happened that led to the flip from hydrochloroquine to ivermectin? Like, what happened? Because before it was hydrochloroquine, everybody, we should be all taking that, and this is the real thing they're trying to hide. And at some point, it went to horse dewormer. The only comment I saw that made sense was that one is just so much more readily available. Like, you actually have to get a doctor to prescribe hydrochloroquine. The other one is literally on a shelf. So, like for horses and animals, so it may be that the FDA has to literally put it on a higher shelf so they can't reach it, or put it behind the counter at the pharmacy. So like, you can't actually just get it. They have to go to your veterinarian to get ivermectin. That might be the actual only thing that we can do to keep it out of their hands.
Yeah, it's there are some reporters that are tracking that. Similar to QAnon, where these things sort of started on places like 4chan or 8chan.
Yeah.
I actually went back and looked. Our agricultural commissioner, Sid Miller, he was talking about the horse dewormer back in December. So clearly there was this sort of percolation on these sites. So yes, we will keep an eye out and see if there's other animal products that will be making their way to the organs of Republicans in Texas. Yeah, no, it's a frightening ecosystem how those things work.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, they're literally like poisoning themselves to own the libs. Like, they're giving themselves diarrhea to own the libs. At least now they know how full of,
ingesting horse base, giving yourself explosive diarrhea to
yeah.
own the libs.
Well, at least they know how full of crap they are. Maybe they'll figure that out. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, so That's all I have. I really got nothing else. I don't know. We're just gonna have to watch the show, I think, and figure out how this is all gonna end.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I don't think so. I think we've covered all the crap.
I think yeah, it's a lot of crap, this one. All right, y'all. Well, thanks again. This has been fun. At least I'd say we try to have some good news in here. I think the best news that we've had so far is that Abbott is literally underwater on his numbers, and so we got to keep it up. What you're doing is working. It sometimes takes a while. I mean, it took a whole year for him to lose 10 points, but we still have a whole nother year and some change before the next election. And so we keep doing and keep working at it, keep supporting your local officials and letting them know that you care about all these issues and you care about what happens to your kids in the schools. It's working. It's working. Just keep it up. Eventually, these guys are either going to, well, obviously, as we mentioned, they're going to kill themselves or they're going to, run themselves out of office. Either way, if we keep doing the same thing and caring about your community and get vaccinated, wear your mask when you can't socially distance around other people, then we will all be able to get back to work, get back to those concerts that we've been missing and all the other things and fun things that we used to do, all those at this point years ago. So with that, thanks again. Check out the news site if you haven't. It's been refreshed completely from the ground up, texassignal.com. And if you want to support us, you can go there and become a Patreon member. And that, little contribution every month goes a long way to help us keep sustaining this type of progressive journalism, which we so desperately need in the state of Texas. And of course, we're on every social media platform. Please join the conversation there. This is a two-way street. We love to hear from you. And until next time, later, y'all.
Bye, guys.